Episode 1, The Brief.
Hang on 2 seconds. Hurry up, Thompson! Come on, Thompson! Just give him the coffee. Coffee? Let's do this.
So David Thompson, who is the assistant editor of the Nolan show, he comes to you with stories and he gets obsessed with all of his investigations. So I thought, here we go, what's next? But obsessed actually means he digs in deep.
Oh, by the way, another FOI response came in today, exactly the same as the BBC.
Oh, did it?
Reasons for disclosure.
So they're all
reasons not
blocking
for
us?
disclosure. Yeah, it was exactly the same.
He came to me about a year ago saying, Stephen, there's a story in Stonewall. There's a story in the BBC in Stonewall, and there's a story in lots of public organisations. So that was about a year ago, and here we are today.
We'll squeeze it out of them.
Right, let's get this done.
80 55 55. Standard rate supply. Tweet at Stephen Nolan.
Here we go.
I'll do with something a bit lighter this morning, Mary. Cheer us all up.
So who do we have at the top here?
Oh, fantastic. I'll put you through. We'll come to you in a couple of minutes, okay?
The biggest show in the country starts now.
The Stephen Nolan Show.
Well, a big message from the Chief Scientific Advisor to Northern Ireland. Well, first and foremost, the Nolan Show does the news without formality. That's what we do. We've been the biggest show in the country in Northern Ireland for 16 years because we don't read out press statements without scrutinising them. If organisations come back to us and refuse to comment, we absolutely torture them within what we're allowed to do to get the public answers. I think we're probably one of the most robust parts of the BBC.
As
Why did it go wrong,
yes,
Gregory?
As you put it previously, you're going to keep digging. And as I responded, digging works both ways.
You dig
Remember
away.
that? Remember
You dig
that?
away.
Well, this story came to me in 2018 when I was looking at how the BBC had described just a comment on the BBC staff page, in which I wondered how the BBC stood over it, because it seemed to me it didn't really stack up. And I asked them, and they said, well, it came from Stonewall, and Stonewall said it's correct, so they're the experts. And I kind of thought, well, that's odd for the BBC to be taking an outside lobby group's position as a matter of fact on anything. So that's kind of how it started, and I've been asking questions about it for a couple of years and kind of working on it more intensely in the past sort of 6 months or so.
Well, I just wanted to see if you might be available one day this week to do that Stonewall podcast with us.
But a recurring theme that you will hear throughout this podcast is that some people from all different sides of this debate either don't want to, or because of the backlash are too afraid to ask or even answer questions about sex, gender, self-ID and trans issues.
I think most people probably associate Stonewall with the gay rights movement in the sort of 80s, 90s, the campaign for same-sex marriage, as advocates of gay rights.
From today, homosexuality will no longer be a bar to service in Britain's armed forces.
For the first time, gay couples in England and Wales could get similar legal rights to married people.
Where Stonewall's views are quite controversial at the moment is around gender. Historically, sex and gender were essentially the same thing. It meant, are you male or female? What Stonewall would argue for is that there are a multiplicity of genders, and it's about how you feel as a person. So you could be in a male body, but you could be a woman, and it's about how you self-identify. And then there are other genders, people who identify as non-binary, neither male nor female. There's gender queer, gender fluid, lots of different ways that people can identify. What Stonewall essentially are arguing for is a change to legislation to protect having a different gender identity, to give a legislative basis for that, which there isn't currently. Some feminist groups feel that by doing this, it does start to impinge on sex-based rights, and that's where the conflict comes. So for example, if you're looking at women's changing rooms, a lot of feminists argue that they should be based solely on sex. But if you change the law to allow people to self-identify their gender, there's a concern that that undermines safe spaces for women and girls in sports, another area where it's become really contentious. Obviously there are physical differences between males and females, and should trans women be allowed to compete in women's sport?
Lorraine Kelly on ITV's Lorraine.
Eddie Izzard is keeping really busy this January. She's running 31 marathons and performing 31 stand-up gigs in 31 countries in 31 days. You were in the news, obviously wanting to be known as she now, and can I apologise to you if I get that wrong? Because we're still kind of just going along with it.
I was asked, I was on National Portrait Gallery Portrait Artist of the Year, and they said, what would you like to be known as? And I thought, well, I'd quite like to be she, because I'm in girl mode, she, her, but basically there's a request, but it's never demand, it's never insistence.
This is all new territory. The gender debate is a debate that's been happening for just a few years, and some of the changes that Stonewall want to bring in are pretty radical in terms of how we perceive gender and how fluid your gender can be and how easily that can change.
But just to be clear, we are not, nor are we allowed to, within the BBC, attack Stonewall. In fact, if anything, what this journalism might do is show how effective Stonewall are at what they're supposed to be, which is a lobbying group. They lobby incredibly well. What this journalism is about is all of the public institutions that should have their own thought of mind, should be standing back and should be saying to themselves, is this in line with our ethos, our policies? And we have big questions around some of that.
It's institutions like the Scottish Government, the Welsh Government, Whitehall, police, NHS, all of these organisations have brought Stonewall in, presumably aware that Stonewall hold some controversial views. So why did they bring them in and allow them to influence their own policies? And can they then say that they are truly independent?
When my guest today, Ruth Hunt, became chief executive, she extended its work to include the trans community. But many Stonewall members have been upset at the line the leadership has taken on gender recognition, that anyone can declare themselves to be male or female, and at their refusal to share a platform with anyone who disagrees.
Trans lives are not debate! Trans lives are not debate!
When you consider how controversial some of these issues are, Stonewall's position of often not debating them has just meant that the potential policies that Stonewall are advocating for can't be scrutinised and can't be debated.
This is a hinge moment in history.
If a man has his gender reassigned and he feels inwardly is a woman, in your view, can he be a woman or not?
No.
Do you understand how people feel that's insulting?
The debate around trans rights and trans issues is incredibly controversial to the extent where people who have legitimate views on both sides of that debate get trolled, get attacked. There are attempts to silence them.
It's a really difficult space then for families and young people to be part of.
A lot of the time people don't feel confident enough to speak up because they feel like if they say anything remotely negative, they're going to be branded as a transphobic bigot. And anything remotely positive, they're going to be branded as a lefty, liberal, snowflake, social justice warrior.
But I think, my job is to resist that pressure from any side and just to get the truth out there as to what's going on.
Where the conflict comes is how you legislate for this and how, as a society, we lay down the law in a way that allows people to be themselves but doesn't infringe on other people's rights.
The DUP MLA, Jim Wells, a former health minister, raised this issue in the Finance Committee at Stormont.
I don't think it's appropriate that any government agency has a relationship with a very militant, one-sided campaigning group.
So far we've gone to the Scottish Government, the Welsh Government, the Northern Irish Government, to the Whitehall departments of the UK Government. We've gone to NHS trusts, the police, universities, and the BBC. So these are all big public sector organisations who already have a relationship with Stonewall. So in this we want to see how governments across the UK and public bodies across the UK have interacted with Stonewall, because we know there's a relationship there, we know money's paid, but we want to see exactly what these governments and institutions have got for their money, what were Stonewall asking for, and what policies changed because of this relationship, if any. So that's what we're trying to find out, is how much influence have Stonewall had over public policy.
One of Stonewall's founding members, is Sir Ian McKellen.
When people say we should have been a democratic organisation, our demands should have been passed by unanimous vote, it was tapping into supporters in very important places like Parliament. The MP whose daughter was gay, who understood the problems. When Stonewall arrived as an organisation, with that backing, he could then confidently go to a young rising politician like Tony Blair and get him on board.
I think there's just a principle here about how government works. We do this day in, day out in the radio about how government works and making sure that government is transparent and open. And as a journalist, everything's about public debate. And some of these issues that Stonewall lobby on, in terms of self-ID, gender, these issues are not settled issues, they're contested. The government has rejected proposals for self-identification, but yet Stonewall have this influential position within these organisations, which is filtering that down through them. So to me, there's a really important principle there as to whether that influence within government means the democratic process could be undermined. And that might sound quite dry, but it's important, because if we don't scrutinise these types of issues, it's not about the rights and wrongs of what Stonewall are doing. They're entitled to lobby. It's about the process. And is it right that in a democracy, a lobby group can have so much influence within government on government policy? And if Stonewall can have it, who else can have it?
Where have you got to with the podcast? Has the opener been done, or is it still being worked on?
No, because we had loads of rights issues, all the stuff we got to use for the opener, but we've got that sorted now. Oh.
Hello.
Morning.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yeah, I've been wondering why my car phone won't link up. That's because that stupid remember he was going
about. By the way, I meant to say to you, we're recording for the podcast this morning.
As you're listening to this podcast, you might be wondering why we're also giving you a sense of what the Nolan radio show is and who the people are behind the scenes, and why we sharing with you some of the banter and some of the interaction that we have on a daily basis. We just want you to know who we are as people and how irritating I can be, to the rest of the team, and how intensely boring Thompson can be, just in case he comes across as this charismatic investigative journalist. He bores me silly sometimes, don't you, Thompson?
Yes.
So we're trying to explain, aren't we? Come here. We're trying to explain why we're keeping this banter in. Why are we keeping this banter in? A sixth floor executive may ask.
I don't know why you're calling it banter. Who says banter?
Oh, what is it? Crack?
Aye, a bit of crack.
Right.
Crack.
We're just really keen that you take this and us for who we are. We're a team of journalists trying to bring you what we think is a really important story, and hopefully if you get a little flavour of who we are, it just might encourage more of you to connect with us, to email us, nolan@bbc.co.uk, and let us know what you think of this podcast, good or bad. I can sum up why this story is important to the audience in a nutshell. If you have any organisation that becomes so powerful that it has penetrated the thinking of many of our public institutions, then there needs to be a lot of transparency around that. The public need to be able to look at that power and scrutinise it and ask these big public, that's a key word, public organisations, how much are you influenced by this group? What about other groups that oppose Stonewall? Are they allowed to influence your policy? This is critically important to the public. It's why we're spending months investigating this. And yes, we are asking questions too of the BBC. We will be looking at many organisations, but the first couple of episodes of this podcast is looking at the BBC. Tim Davie is Director General of the BBC.
My role as the Director General is to absolutely make sure that the BBC's impartiality is first and foremost protected.
I think where it becomes a problem for the BBC is that Stonewall obviously have a set of views, and we are, as an organisation, pride ourselves on independence and impartiality and being separate from groups, and it's very difficult to have any relationship with any charity or any group if you work for the BBC, particularly charities who are lobbying on sensitive areas.
What are the different gender identities?
Do you know there are so many gender identities? So we know we've got male and female, but there are over 100, if not more, gender identities now.
So there's a lot of criticism about how the BBC provide educational material for young children, about there being 100 or more genders, which most people probably won't have heard of. So lots of people were very angry about that, and it's that type of thing that we want to find out. Is that the BBC's position, or is that Stonewall's position? And did Stonewall influence the BBC and say, look, this is where you've got to go to. You have to teach kids about this. We know that Stonewall want to influence the education system on matters around sex and gender. Like, why wouldn't they? But if you're a member of the public who doesn't agree with Stonewall, and you see Stonewall and the BBC have a relationship, and that Stonewall provide advice to the BBC, you'd be questioning, is the BBC really impartial on these issues? The BBC will say there's like a Chinese wall between their diversity and inclusion people and the journalism and the independence of the BBC as a broadcaster. But if there's a perception out there that the BBC has taken a position on all of these issues around gender, and people will argue that by saying there's 100 genders they have taken a position, is that because Stonewall have asked them to? And is there political pressure for a public service broadcaster to push the agenda of a lobby group? And that's what we're trying to get an answer to.
In the next episode coming up, hear how the BBC suggested straight people might be listened to more than gay people, and the Workplace Equality Index, a league table which big organisations were very keen to climb up. Were they too keen?